The first brother's forepaw landed on the far bank of the Sand River without a sound, the dry grass barely bending under his weight. Behind him, the second brother paused, head low, reading the air that carried the scent of 9 lionesses and their cubs. The water between them and the territory still held the day's heat, but neither male hesitated. They had walked the river's edge for days, young, strong, and inseparable. And what they smelled on the wind was not a home, but an opportunity. 9 lionesses, 30 days. That is the arithmetic of this story, and it is not a gentle one. The mothers of the Sand River pride had held this ground through dry seasons and lean hunts, through the slow work of raising cubs that most humans will never see. They knew every bend of the river, every hidden den, every place where a hyena might test a weakened flank. What they did not yet know was that 2 brothers had decided the territory was theirs to take. The promise of this story is simple, and it will carry through every hour that follows. Watch what a mother does when the order she built is dismantled in a single month. Watch how she measures a stranger, how she hides what she cannot defend, how she chooses between flight and stillness. The takeover will happen. The question is not whether the brothers will win. The question is what the mothers will lose and what they will refuse to surrender. The pride moved through the late afternoon like a single slow creature, 9 tawny bodies scattered across the shade of a grove of knobthorn trees. The lionesses rested on their sides, cubs tucked against their bellies, tails flicking at flies that droned in the thick heat. One mother lay apart from the others, her head raised, ears rotating forward and back with a rhythm that never quite stopped. She was listening to something the rest of the pride had not yet heard. Her name is not recorded in any book that matters. She was simply the oldest of the 9, her muzzle scarred from old fights, her ribs visible beneath a coat that had seen too many dry seasons. She had buried 3 litters in her life, each one taken by males who came to claim what the mothers had built. She knew the pattern the way a lion knows the river's depth by the color of the water. The second brother moved into view on the opposite bank, and she went still. Stillness. That was her first response. And it was not fear, it was calculation. The oldest lioness watched the 2 males as they paced the far bank, their shoulders rolling with the easy confidence of animals that had never been defeated. She counted their youth, their weight, the way they moved together as a single instrument. Then she lowered her head and began very slowly to lead her cubs toward the deeper cover of the thickets. The Sand River at this time of year is not the wide, slow water of the wet season. It has shrunk to a series of shallow pools strung across a wide bed of pale sand, and the crossings are easy for any animal determined enough to wade through. The brothers had found a crossing a day earlier, and they had measured the pride's strength from a distance. 2 against 9 should not favor the 2. But lions do not fight as a herd, and the mothers knew it. A coalition of 2 brothers can do what a single male cannot. They can rotate the watch, sleep without fear of ambush, and corner a rival with a pincer that no lone lion can break. The larger the coalition, the greater the advantage. And though these 2 were young, they were matched in speed and hunger. They had been driven out of their natal pride together, and they had survived the wilderness because they never split up. That bond was their weapon. The first brother was the bolder of the 2, the one who set the pace and chose the line of approach. The second brother was the heavier, slower to move but harder to stop, the one who held ground when the first brother pushed too far. Watching them from a distance, a human observer would see 2 animals moving as one. Watching them closely, you would see the division of labor that made them dangerous. On the 3rd morning, the first brother waded into the river without pausing. The water ran dark around his chest, and he did not look back to see if the second brother followed. He did not need to. The heavier male was already moving, his bulk displacing the current, his eyes fixed on the same line of trees that had caught the first brother's attention. They crossed together, and the balance of power in this stretch of the Sand River changed in that single wet moment. The mothers had not scattered. That would have been surrender. Instead, the oldest lioness rose to her feet and walked directly toward the riverbank, not to attack, but to be seen. She stopped at the edge of the grass, head low, tail flicking once, and she stared at the 2 brothers as they shook the water from their coats. She was reading them. She was letting them know she had counted them, and she was buying time for the younger mothers to move the cubs. The cubs were the true target, and every lioness in the pride knew it. When new males take over a pride, the first thing they do is eliminate the cubs they did not father. because cubs mean the mothers will not come into heat until the young are weaned. A male who wants to pass on his genes cannot wait years for someone else's offspring to grow. The brothers had not yet moved toward the dens, but the oldest mother was already acting on what she knew. She led her cubs into a thicket of acacia, where the thorns made a wall that even a determined male would think twice about pushing through. The cubs were old enough to understand stillness, and they pressed themselves flat against the roots, their amber eyes wide, their breath shallow. Their mother stood over them, her body between the thorns and the river, and she did not move for the rest of that day. The sun crossed the sky, and the shadows stretched, and the oldest lioness remained exactly where she had placed herself. The oldest mother did not move for the rest of that day because stillness was the only wall the acacia could not provide. She had read the brothers, traded her own visibility for the cubs' hidden minutes, and now the second brother is coming closer to test the scent of the youngest litter. If you want to stay inside these quiet calculations, subscribe and keep watching what the mothers do when the threat is still unproven. Type stillness in the comments if you recognized that waiting as a form of defense. The second brother came closer than the first that afternoon. He walked the line of the riverbank, pausing to test the air, his mane dark with moisture, his eyes sweeping the thickets where the mothers had disappeared. He found the scent of the newest cubs, the youngest litter, the one that had not yet learned to stay silent. He stopped. He lowered his head, and for a long moment, he stared directly into the place where the youngest mother had hidden her two cubs. The mother did not run. That is the part a human observer would find hardest to understand. She held her ground, her body flattened against the earth, her eyes locked on the male's face, and she let him see that she would not be the first to blink. The second brother watched her for a long, silent minute. Then he turned and walked back toward the first brother, and the moment passed. But every mother in the pride had seen what he was looking for. Inside the dens, the truth was darker than the shade. The youngest cubs, the ones born in the last season, had been moved twice in a single day, carried by the scruff of the neck across open ground, their tiny bodies trembling with a fear they did not yet have words for. Their mothers worked in silence, no growls, no warning calls, because sound travels on the river air, and sound would bring the brothers faster than any scent. 9 lionesses, 2 brothers, 30 days. The arithmetic of this story was beginning to close in on the mothers, and the oldest among them was already calculating the cost of the fight that was coming. On the 5th evening, the first brother crossed the river again, this time alone, and he did not stop at the bank. He moved inland, following the scent of the pride's main kill site, where the remains of a buffalo carcass still lay in the grass. He was not hunting, he was claiming. He walked through the middle of the pride's territory, as if he owned it, his head high, his scent marking every bush he passed. The mothers watched him from the shadows, and none of them moved to challenge him. The second brother waited on the far bank, a silent anchor, his eyes tracking the first brother's progress. That was the pattern they had built in the wilderness. One pushed, the other held. If the first brother drew a threat, the second would be there to meet it. If the first brother found weakness, the second would be the weight that exploited it. The mothers were learning this pattern quickly, and they were learning that it left them few openings. The youngest mother made the mistake on the 7th night. She had moved her cubs to a new den away from the river, deeper into the thickets, and she had let her guard down for a single hour of sleep. The first brother found the den by scent alone, his nose following the trail of warm milk and soft fur that the mother had left in the grass. He did not enter. He stood at the entrance, his massive head blocking the light, and he breathed in the scent of the 2 cubs inside. The mother woke to the sound of his breathing. She did not panic. She rose to her feet, placed her body between the den entrance and the male, and she let out a low, flat growl that was not a threat, but a statement. The first brother looked at her, and for a moment, the outcome was genuinely uncertain. Then the second brother stepped out of the darkness behind him, and the mother knew she was outnumbered. She did not flee. She did not abandon her cubs. She held her ground, and the 2 brothers eventually withdrew, not because they were afraid, but because the risk of injury was not worth the reward of killing 2 cubs that might not survive the night anyway. The mother stood at the den entrance for the rest of the night, her eyes never closing, her body never relaxing. When dawn came, she was still there. This is the moment where the viewer might think the story has reached its low point. It has not. The takeover had barely begun, and the mothers were still holding the line, but the cost was becoming visible. They were eating less, sleeping less, moving their cubs more. The oldest lioness had lost weight in a single week, her ribs now sharp against her flank. The youngest mother's eyes had developed the hollow look of an animal that has not rested in days. If you have ever watched a mother go still and silent, you already know what that stillness costs. The body is at rest, but the mind is not. Every muscle is holding tension. Every sense is straining for the next sound, the next scent, the next sign that the threat is moving. That is what the lionesses of the Sand River were doing in those first weeks. They were not resting. They were waiting. The brothers were patient. That was their advantage. They did not rush the takeover, because rushing meant risk, and risk meant injury, and an injured lion in the wilderness is a dead lion. They moved slowly, methodically, marking territory, testing the mother's responses, learning the layout of the dens and the paths between them. By the 10th day, they had mapped the pride's entire world. The first brother returned to the kill site on the 12th morning, and this time, he did not leave. He lay down beside the remains of a wildebeest carcass, his head on his paws, his eyes half closed, and he waited. The mothers watched him from a distance, and they understood what he was doing. He was establishing a center. He was telling them that this territory now had a new heart, and it was not in the dens where the cubs were hidden. By the 15th day, the balance had shifted visibly. The mothers were no longer feeding together as a pride. They were breaking into smaller groups, moving at odd hours, avoiding the open ground where the brothers patrolled. The oldest lioness had moved her cubs a third time to a den so far from the river that she had to walk an hour each way to drink. She made that walk at night, alone, and she made it fast. The second brother began to shadow her on the 20th day. He did not approach. He simply appeared at the edge of her line of sight, a dark shape against the pale grass, and he followed her at a distance that never closed and never widened. He was not hunting her. He was teaching her that nowhere in this territory was out of his reach. He was breaking her, slowly, with mathematics. The older lioness understood the lesson. On the 23rd day, she stopped moving her cubs. There was nowhere left to take them that the brothers had not already scented, and the energy cost of constant relocation was killing her faster than any male would. She found a den, a hollow beneath a fallen fever tree, and she made it her final stand. She lay down beside her cubs, and she waited. The 25th day brought the first fight. A small coalition of two younger males, outsiders from the north, had followed the scent of the takeover and tried to test the brothers' claim. The first brother met them at the river crossing, and the second brother came through the grass behind them, and the fight was short and brutal and one-sided. The outsiders fled, one of them limping, blood dark on his hind leg. The mothers watched the brothers drive the intruders away, and something changed in their assessment. The first fight ended with one outsider limping and the brothers still in possession of the territory. If you want to remain inside this long observation as the mothers decide what that means, subscribe, and the next part of the record will reach you as it is set down. Leave the phrase, "the outsiders broke," in the comments if you saw the same shift in the mother's assessment. Here was the revelation that the mothers had been waiting for. The brothers were not just strong enough to take the pride, they were strong enough to hold it. And in the calculus of survival, a mother lioness will accept a male who can protect her cubs from worse threats. The brothers had just proven they could do that. The mothers did not celebrate. They did not relax, but they began to shift their position, ever so slightly, from resistance to acceptance. The takeover was effectively decided on the 28th day, though the formal submission took longer. The oldest lioness led her cubs out of the den beneath the fever tree and walked, without being forced, toward the first brother. She did not bow. She did not groom him. She simply lay down at the edge of the clearing where he rested. Her cubs pressed against her side, and she stopped resisting. It was not affection. It was a transaction. By the 30th morning, the Sand River Pride had 9 lionesses, 2 dominant males, and a new order that had been written in a single month. The cubs, miraculously, had survived. The brothers had not killed them, and that was not mercy. It was calculation. The cubs were old enough that their mothers would not return to heat quickly, but they were also young enough that their scent had not yet become a threat. The brothers had made a choice, and the mothers had made theirs. The first brother stood on a rise above the river at dawn on that final day, the light catching the edges of his mane, and he looked out over the territory he had claimed. The second brother lay below him, head on paws, watching the mothers move toward the watering hole. They had done it. 2 brothers, 9 lionesses, 30 days, and the Sand River belonged to them. But the story did not end there. The oldest lioness watched the brothers from the shade of a knobthorn tree, her cubs nursing beside her, her eyes still calculating. She had accepted the new order, but she had not surrendered her judgment. She was watching the 2 brothers with the same attention she had given every male who had ever tried to take this pride. She was testing them. She was waiting to see if they would hold, or if they would fail, and what she would do when they did. The 2 brothers moved through the territory as its owners now, their scent layered over every bush and tree, their patrols carving a path that the mothers had learned to read. The takeover was complete. The arithmetic had resolved. And yet, in the quiet moments between the patrols, a mother would raise her head and listen to the river, and she would hold her cubs a little closer, and she would calculate the days ahead. These 2 brothers had become the heart of the Sand River pride. They had earned the territory with their patience and their strength, and they had done it together, each one trusting the other in a way that no lone lion could. But the mothers who watched them knew that coalitions rise and fall, that the brothers were not immortal, and that the river would keep flowing long after every lion on this ground was gone. In the end, what a mother lioness does is not measured in victories. It is measured in days. It is measured in the small, invisible choices she makes to keep her cubs alive through a season of chaos. The 2 brothers took the pride in 30 days. The mothers gave ground, and then they gave more, and then they found a new way to stand. The cubs are alive. The river still runs, and the oldest lioness is still watching, still calculating, still waiting for the next thing that will come across that water. The dens themselves told the story of those 30 days. Where once the mothers had kept their cubs in shallow scrapes near the river, within easy reach of water and open grass, the new order had driven them deep into the thorn country. One den sat beneath the roots of a fallen leadwood, its entrance barely wide enough for a cub to squeeze through. Another lay in a crack between 2 boulders, invisible until you stood directly above it. The mothers had become architects of concealment, and their craft had been honed by necessity. Each move had cost them, in body weight and in the precious hours of rest they could have spent regaining strength. But the cubs had survived, and that was the only currency that mattered. The oldest lioness, the one with the scarred muzzle, had measured every risk against the lives of her 2 remaining cubs, and she had chosen the path that kept them breathing. What the human eye would miss, watching this pride from a distance, was the subtle reordering of alliances among the mothers themselves. They had not always agreed. In the old order, the strongest mothers had claimed the best hunting grounds and the safest dens, and the younger mothers had deferred. The arrival of the brothers had collapsed those hierarchies. A mother with a single cub and a mother with 3 now shared the same thicket, their bodies pressed together in a solidarity that had not existed before. The first brother noticed this shift. He had expected the mothers to fracture under pressure, to turn on one another in the scramble for safety. Instead, he found them drawing closer, their vigilance overlapping, their warnings passing between them in low rumbles that carried no further than the nearest ears. He could not break a coalition that refused to become a target. The second brother tested this new unity on the 26th night, moving toward the thicket where the youngest mother had hidden her pair of cubs. He did not approach directly. He circled wide, downwind of the den, hoping to catch the scent of the young ones before the mothers could react. But the oldest lioness had placed herself on that flank, and she rose from the grass as he passed, her head low, her eyes reflecting the pale light of the moon. She did not growl. She did not charge. She simply stood, a wall of scarred muscle between the male and the den, and she held his gaze until the second brother turned aside. He had learned what the first brother already knew. This mother would trade her own life for the lives in that thicket, and no territory was worth that fight. The mothers had found their rhythm by the final days, a rhythm that looked like surrender, but was something else entirely. They moved when the brothers slept. They fed in the hours when the males were patrolling the far bank. They kept their cubs in the deep cover where the thorns and the shadows did the work that the mothers no longer had the strength to do. The pride had not been broken. It had been reshaped. The oldest lioness understood this better than any of the others, because she had done it before. She had watched males come and go, had seen coalitions rise and fall, had buried the cubs that the violent ones had taken in the days before the brothers arrived. She knew that the new order was not permanent. She knew that the brothers, for all their strength, would one day be old, or injured, or challenged by a pair even younger than themselves. And she knew that when that day came, the mothers would still be here, and the river would still be running. So she waited. That was her discipline. She did not fight the brothers, because fighting them would cost her the cubs she had fought so hard to keep. She did not flee, because there was nowhere left to go that did not cross another male's territory or another pride's hunting ground. She simply endured, hour by hour, day by day, and she watched. She watched the first brother pace the rise above the river. She watched the second brother sleep with one eye open, his head on his paws, his breath slow and even. She watched the two of them together in the late gold of the afternoon, their manes dark against the pale grass, and she saw what they were. They were not conquerors in any lasting sense. They were young, and they were strong, and they had taken what they wanted. But they were also temporary, as everything in this country is temporary, and the mothers had outlasted every male who had ever tried to claim them. She had buried 3 litters, and she was still here, still watching, still calculating, still measuring the days ahead. The cubs had learned the new order faster than their mothers had. By the end of the 30 days, the youngest litter no longer startled at the sight of the 2 males moving through the grass. They pressed themselves flat, they held their breath, and they waited, just as their mothers had taught them. The oldest lioness watched her own pair of cubs practice this stillness, and she felt something that a human might call satisfaction, though it was simpler than that. It was the knowledge that the lesson had been learned. The discipline had passed down. What the brothers did not know, moving through the territory they had claimed, was that the mothers had already begun the quiet work of undoing them. They did not conspire. There was no plot, no plan, no shared word of rebellion. They simply kept their cubs alive, and they kept themselves strong enough to hunt, and they waited for the moment when the brothers' youth would fade, or their confidence would crack, or a rival coalition would come across the river and test the claim. The mothers knew how to wait. That was the oldest skill in the world. The river itself had become a different place in the days since the takeover. The pools had shrunk further, the water lower on the pale sand, and the crossings that had once been easy were now passages of exposed ground, where a lioness and her cubs would be visible to any eye on either bank. The mothers had adjusted. They drank in the dark hours when the moon was down and the world held its breath. They crossed where the reeds gave cover, where the scent of mud and water would mask their own tracks. The quiet work of undoing the brothers has already begun, not with a fight, but with the oldest skill in the world: waiting. Subscribe if you want to remain with this record as the mothers keep their discipline through the shrinking river and the dark hours. In the comments, write stillness if you saw what the cubs practiced, or waiting if you understand what the mothers are doing. And the oldest lioness has kept one crossing entirely to herself. The oldest lioness had found a crossing that she used alone, a narrow channel between 2 boulders where the water ran fast, and the footing was treacherous. She used it only when she had to, moving through in the seconds before dawn, her body low, her eyes scanning both banks before she stepped. She had used this crossing for years, long before the brothers arrived, and she had never once seen another lion use it. It was her secret, and she guarded it the way she guarded her cubs, with silence and patience. By the 30th evening, the pride had settled into a shape that would hold for a while. The brothers had the territory, the mothers had the cubs, and the river kept flowing between them, not as a barrier anymore, but as a fact of the world, something that simply was. The first brother stood in the shallows, drinking, his mane dark with the last light of the day. The second brother lay on the bank above him, watching the mothers move toward the thickets with their young at their sides. The oldest lioness paused at the edge of the grass and looked back at the river, at the 2 dark shapes against the pale water, and she let out a breath that was not quite a sigh. She had seen this before. She would see it again, in some form, in the seasons that remained to her. The brothers were not the first, and they would not be the last, and the mothers would go on being mothers, because that was the only thing that had ever mattered. She turned, and she led her cubs into the deep cover of the thickets, where the thorns made a wall that even a determined male would think twice about pushing through. The night was coming on, and there would be hunting to do, and feeding, and watching, and waiting. The two brothers would hold the ground for now. The mothers would hold the future, in the hidden dens and the quiet hours, in the bodies of the cubs who had learned to go still at the sound of a strange step. The arithmetic of this story was complete. The discipline of the mothers was not. The oldest lioness moved through the last of the evening light with a gait that had not changed in all the years she had guarded this ground. The cubs followed in her shadow, their small paws finding the same silent placements she used, learning the geography of caution with every step. Somewhere behind them, the two brothers had begun their night patrol, their low rumbles carrying across the water like the first notes of a song the mothers already knew. She did not turn to watch. She did not need to. She knew where they were the way she knew where the river pooled deepest after rain. The stars were coming out over the sand river, and the air was growing cool, and the world was settling into the rhythm that would carry it through the darkness. The cubs pressed close, and the oldest lioness lowered herself onto the soft earth beneath the thorn trees, her body forming a curve around the small, warm shapes at her side. She rested her muzzle on her forepaws, and she let her eyes drift half closed, and she listened. The river murmured. The insects droned. Somewhere in the grass, the two brothers were still moving, still claiming, still marking the ground they had won. But the oldest mother was already somewhere else, in that quiet country that lions enter when the work of the day is done. She had done what needed to be done. She had kept the cubs alive through a month of chaos, had read the two brothers and found them strong enough to hold, had bent without breaking, and waited without surrendering. The river was still running, the cubs were still breathing, and she was still here, the scarred and patient matriarch of a pride that had been taken and had somehow, in the taking, found the shape of its next season. She did not think of it as victory. She did not think of it at all, in the way that humans think, with words and judgments and plans. She simply lay there in the dark, her body a promise of warmth and protection, her ears still turning at every sound, her breath slow and even. The two brothers might hold this territory for a year, or for a season, or for a single turning of the moon. The mothers would hold the cubs, and the cubs would grow, and the river would keep its old patient course through the heart of everything that lived and died along its banks. That is the long truth of this place, the truth that the 30 days only made visible for a moment. Coalitions rise and fade, and the great males roar their claims across the water, and the mothers go on doing the oldest work there is, the work that asks no applause and offers no ceremony. The two brothers took the pride, and the 9 lionesses endured, and the cubs survived. And the sand river is still there, still moving, still holding the memory of every paw that has ever crossed its pale bed. When the moon rose above the knobthorn trees, its light found the oldest lioness still awake, her eyes fixed on the far bank where the two brothers had made their camp. She watched them for a long time, the bolder one and the heavier one, the pair that had rewritten the arithmetic of this pride in a single month. Then she closed her eyes, and she let the night take her, and she slept the sleep of an animal that has done what it could and will do what it must when the morning comes. The river moved past in the darkness, patient and unhurried, and the two brothers slept on their rise above the water, and the 9 mothers slept with their cubs in the hidden dens, and the oldest lioness dreamed whatever it is that old lions dream when the days of their long endurance settle into the quiet ground beneath the stars. The takeover was done. The stories were written in the sand and the scent and the stillness, and the sand river held them all, the way it always had, the way it always would, long after the last roar had faded into the grasslands.